Welcome to the Journey Podcast, and thanks so much for taking a little bit of extra time out of your week this week to join us as we continue to learn together how hearing other stories helps us to live a better story ourselves. Our mental health is such an important facet of our lives, and a lot of the principles and practices we use in taking care of our mental health translate directly to our faith life. That is, whether it's prayer, meditation, rest, or using others as a support around us. Today we have the chance to sit down with Shaina Theis and talk a bit about her work as a professional in the mental health field, as well as her personal faith journey. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hey, and welcome back to the Journey Podcast. My name is Eli, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by a mental health professional who works deeply in the mental health care field. Her name is Shaina Theis. Welcome, Shaina. Thank you so much for being here and joining me.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Well, starting out, I know you just a little bit. We've shared a couple words every now and again, but I don't know you super well. So both for myself and everybody else who's listening, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so like you said, I am a mental health professional. I'm a therapist. My background is in social work, so that's kind of where I started. I'm married. I've been married for almost 10 years. I have 2 little girls. I'm not from here, but I am from Kentucky. And yeah, I'm a therapist, so excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. First of all, I have also shared a few words with your husband periodically, and actually he went to a conference with us. I'm sure you remember this past year.
Yeah.
And he's a really great guy. He's always such a calming presence everywhere
Yes,
he ever is. I know he's always, everyone always enjoys him a lot. So how about you tell us, as we're jumping into it, how about you tell us just a little bit about how you got into the mental health field? Like, what drove you to that?
Well, like I said before, I started in social work. So as a kid, I was in Girl Scouts. So big part of that was just volunteering in my community. And that was a big part of my childhood. And I think thinking about college, like that's really the only thing that I knew. And so I was thinking, what profession could I go into that would allow me to continue helping other people? And so I majored in psychology. And so when I first started college, I didn't think about social work until one of my, a supervisor, she was a social worker. And she just kind of told me that you could pretty much do anything with that degree. You could, help younger people, older people. You could work in schools or in hospitals or, so that's what I did. But I didn't become a therapist until several years into my career. I became a mother, and, as other moms listening, like a lot of being a mom is hard, and that brings up a lot of things, a lot of things that maybe you didn't realize you were struggling with. So, I decided to become a therapist and study the brain and, how, just kind of to also learn more about myself too. Yeah,
that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And do you feel like as you've kind of been in that field for a time, do you feel like you've already learned a lot about yourself?
Yes, very much so. Like maybe more than I want to know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, as a therapist, obviously you go to Crosspoint here and, and you have a very active faith life. Mm-hmm. How do you find your social work kind of intersecting with your faith life as you, grow closer to God, and as you, there's a lot of parallels there, obviously, which we'll talk about, but, what do you kind of think about that as far as your spirituality intersecting with your mental health profession?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that sticks out to me is, social workers, we're supposed to help the people that are the most unfortunate or the minorities, people in poverty, people, and that's, so essentially that's loving people. Sure. And so that's what following Jesus is all about, is loving others, especially those that need it, right? Yeah. And so that is a big thing that I see, you know, sure. a big similarity. And just here recently, some of Chad's recent sermons have really spoke to me as far as the overlap. So I've been getting really excited about noticing that.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of times it's funny whenever Chad does a sermon, it's like it always seems to intersect with something that's going on.
Yeah. You know? It's like he's talking to me or about me. Yeah.
Which I feel like is what a lot of the best pastors do. Yes. So shout out Chad. Good job, buddy. You're killing it. But yeah, so with that, you know, obviously as our mental health intersects with our faith life, what would you say as a professional in the mental health field, what would you say are some practices that work well with our mental health and our maintenance of our mental health in like coinciding with our faith, like that can translate, you know?
Yeah. Well, here recently, I've not always been great at prayer, especially for myself. Yes. But recently I've become really interested in meditation, and that's essentially the same thing. I mean, I think taking time to just sit with yourself and feel all the things that you're feeling and just have some quiet, and to spend time, you know, from the Buddhist perspective, there is no God when you're meditating, but when you're praying or spending time with God, that is a way of meditating and spending time with Him and yourself. And you know, we always, when we're praying, we always, you know, we want an answer. We keep waiting for an answer, and I think sometimes we don't get an answer, or we don't get it in the way that we expect. But I think sitting quietly so that you can calm your mind can help you sometimes to hear that answer.
Yeah, and I mean, even the Bible even calls us to rest.
Yes.
In that, like to rest in Him, and you know, oftentimes you're 100% correct. I think so much in our prayer life, and I think a lot of it too has to do a bit with the culture that we're in currently, is our expectation for now.
Yes.
Like right this moment is when I expect something to happen. You know, as someone who, you know, has struggled with anxiety and mental health myself, like it is such a journey, and you expect everything to be resolved in the immediacy.
Yes.
Right? Yep. And so I think that becomes a real exercise in faith, is when we intersect those two aspects and say, okay, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to pray, I'm going to spend time resting, but also forcing yourself and practicing contentment, right? Yeah. That contentment in the moment of like, okay, I'm doing this thing and I have to wait. Like I have to spend this time waiting. Do you have like maybe a thought on how to be better at waiting, you know? And maybe not, because I know I sure don't. This is me asking for me personally, just about. But waiting is hard.
It is. It's very hard. What I was thinking about when you were talking about that was just like feelings, like emotions that we have that we don't want to feel. And those are the things that we need to sit with and rest with to understand more. The things that we ask God to take away, usually, you know, the pain and all those other things. Those are the things that we have to sit with, unfortunately, so that we can understand them. But the waiting, well, I think it's back to a meditation practice. It's just, I think it can be helpful to have something to focus on in the present, like focusing on your breath, something that we always have with us. Just focusing on that, and just your mind will wander, and just, you know, just bring it back to that. And I think you'll be surprised at what kind of pops up in your mind.
For sure. And, you know, you and I had exchanged a few thoughts and ideas as we were preparing for this podcast, and we were talking a little bit about it, and you mentioned even earlier, just a few moments ago, when we were talking about Chad's message this past Sunday, talking about building our life on things that don't last, food, sex, relationships, this, that, and the other. And then we talk about then your mindfulness of your breath, like paying attention to like the minutia, like the very small things.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about that just a little bit, about kind of how, when you were working with your clients and you're teaching them about some of that stuff and some of the stuff you were telling me about with that.
Yeah. I think it was this past message of Chad, or maybe 2 messages ago. I can't remember. He was talking about, so the building your life on things that don't last. And that reminded me of how a lot of our pain and suffering comes from how we're constantly wanting more of a good thing, or something that feels good, or something that's pleasant or comfortable, whether that be an emotion itself or a thing, or we're trying to avoid things that don't feel good, whether that be an emotion that doesn't feel good, or a thing that doesn't feel good. So, and that's, nothing is permanent. And so if we're constantly, avoiding or craving more, we're never in the present moment, which is actually the majority of the time is, I think we miss out on the majority of our life by doing that. And so, what Chad said is that, God and our relationship with him and his promise, that's the only thing that's permanent. And I don't know if I answered that.
No, that's great. That's great. And I think, kind of leading into that nothing is permanent thing, I know I have a very personal experience with the feeling of nothing is permanent, even though it feels like in the moment it feels so painful. And I mean, I have some very real, visceral experiences with that, which is interesting to me, because I know with some people that I've talked to, they think that because of my profession that I wouldn't encounter some of those things, which is interesting, because obviously to me, I'm not a worship leader. I'm just Eli, and I think with mental health professionals, it's probably perceived a lot of the same way.
Yes.
So do you have a personal life story of how you've kind of encountered mental health, or something where it intersects with your life specifically, outside of the practical, but a story of point A to point B? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm in the middle of A and B.
Yeah.
But yes, I've talked about this on stage before, and I kind of mentioned earlier in this podcast, is parenting. When I moved to Maysville, I considered myself atheist. I grew up in church, kind of. We weren't like every Sunday, but that was what I was supposed to believe. And I didn't have a great relationship with my family, and so when I went to college, I did the opposite of what they wanted me to do. So complete opposite religion, opposite politics, and so I was, I'm atheist now, right?
Sure.
But then when I moved to Maysville and we needed a church, we thought we were just going to go to church to meet people, And when we came to Cross Point, and we were like, nope, God had other plans.
Yeah.
Now we're like, my husband was a guardian, and I serve, and now I'm on this podcast talking about faith.
Yeah.
Like, it's but mental health wise, I struggle with depression and anxiety, and I struggle with like fear of judgment. This podcast made me super nervous to even, to be invited. Like, what could I have to say,
Sure. If it makes you feel any better, I struggle with that every time I do one of these. I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't even talk very much, but here I am.
Yeah. And not having a great relationship with any of my family, but either parent or step parent. Yeah. It's really hard to have a relationship with a God that you can't really see or touch.
Yeah. Especially when he's portrayed as a parental.
And portrayed as a parental. Like, I was rebellious, so I kind of like want to rebel against God, like, why do you have to tell me what to do? I've been doing everything on my own my whole life. And it got me to this point, and I feel like I've been very successful, but there's still things that I struggle with, and having faith in God is one of the things that I haven't done yet. And so that's what I'm trying.
Yeah. No, for sure. And how do you feel, with those things? Because a lot of times it's not isolated incidents, right? It's our especially with anxiety or depression, it's kind of the culmination of a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
And so as you are on this journey with your faith, with and obviously, we talk about it all the time in church, and it's kind of built into the vernacular of our Crosspoint is, we don't want to worship in rows. We want to worship in circles, right? And so how does having connection with people, how does building relationships, how does that aid both your spiritual walk, but further than that too, your individual mental health walk?
Yeah. Well, I think for anyone that has experienced some type of trauma or hardship, it usually involved a person. And so we lose trust in people. And so then we isolate, and we're alone. And biologically speaking, we've always lived in groups and tribes, cave dwellers. We were always with at least another human being for survival. And so there's a lot of research around that. Just biologically, we need people to survive. And we also need people to help us learn that while maybe our parents or other people have hurt us, that doesn't mean that everyone is going to hurt us. And so, and we need people to help, just to share our story, me and you talking about things that, oh, I didn't know you dealt with that, so it makes you feel less alone, and to have someone to hold you accountable, and to not feel like you're alone. And that can help, I think, with both your mental health and your faith.
Yeah. I've always felt, I was telling one of my friends, he lives in Illinois, and we were chatting the other day, and we were talking about how, a lot of times I don't like for people to have answers for me. I like to be able to figure stuff out. I like to be able to, come to my own conclusions and do this or that or the other.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I also, even though I am very introverted, I don't care if anyone is in a room with me, but I like knowing that if I want to go to a room, someone else is going to be there. It's a weird, it's probably, I don't know if that's healthy or not, but it's a weird thing. But it's also like just knowing, like being in that circle as opposed to a row. It's just knowing that someone else is there.
Yeah.
And it's knowing that, like, okay, I have the space to figure my stuff out, but also I have the space to know that, like, I don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
Like I can do it alone, and I can figure stuff out, and people are going to be rooting me on.
Yes.
But also if I come to that person, it's like, okay, now here's this community that I crave, and I this is going to help pull me through this really tough section.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like that rears its head a lot too as we deal with negative thoughts and emotions. Because I know, again, for me, when I deal with negative thoughts, I become very reclusive, right? Which is such an interesting thing, because as you said, our whole thing for so long has been being in a tribe and being in a group and seeking out that camaraderie and seeking out that point of relation with people. But for me, I go away, and that's how, honestly, all of my friends know that I'm struggling, is they'll be like, hey dude, I haven't heard from you in like 2 weeks, what's going on? Why do you think that is, that not only when we pull away, but that's when we start feeling further from God? As we start feeling those negative emotions, we start feeling further from God, we start feeling further from people. What do you think causes that? Like, what do you think puts us in that frame of mind?
Yeah, well, going back to biology, we have a bias towards negativity because we need to know all the potential things that could go wrong in order to survive, in order to protect the tribe or yourself.
Yeah.
And so you start having those negative thoughts, that influences your mood too. So you start having negative thoughts, now you're going to feel more anxious or depressed. And if you're both of those, both depression and anxiety can leads to isolation. And I think for the anxiety, that's fear.
Sure.
And so then that makes your, fight or flight kick in. So, this thing that I'm afraid of, or this negative thought, I can't really fight it, so I can run away from it.
Sure.
I can try to escape it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and how would you directly combat that anxiety? Then that feeling of like, okay, I'm trying to figure out this outcome. I'm trying to predict it, but it's scary, so I'm just going to run away from this thing.
Yeah.
Like, what would you do to counteract that?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to approach that. I think you can approach it with your body and by just triggering that relaxation response in your body. So by, deep breathing, physical movement. But you can also, tackle that with your mind too. I think it's mindfulness. It goes back to the sitting still and resting. You have to notice when you're having these thoughts. You have to notice that it's negative, that it's biased. We call it like irrational thoughts or cognitive distortions.
Sure.
Okay, I'm mind reading, or well, maybe I'm overgeneralizing. And then just name it.
I'm smiling right now because I do that stuff all the time. Like so often I'll go into a conversation that I'm going to have with someone, and I am already knowing what they're going to say back to, and I have no clue what they're going to respond with. And 98% of the time, it's not even remotely close to what they say.
Yeah.
But it is. You're totally right. It's just funny because like what I've also experienced is so many people have those same experiences, but they're afraid to talk about it because they think they're alone in it.
Yeah,
and
but
so
everybody
does it. And the sooner we can all come to the awareness of, hey, I know you've got stuff, I've got stuff. Let's deal with our stuff together.
Yes.
Which is why Celebrate Recovery is such an awesome program.
Yes. Break the generational trauma. Trauma is like, it's passed down genetically.
Yeah.
And I have all sorts of studies that I could quote, but I won't do that. But so I think, we all have. There's just been so much of it, and we all struggle.
Definitely. Well, how about anybody who's listening? This is kind of the last thing we'll touch on really quick. What if someone is listening to this and they're struggling? They're like, okay, yes, I struggle with mental health, but I have no clue where to start. Like, what would your first step be? Is like, okay, this is how you start getting help. This is how you start on your road to recovery. Yeah,
I think. I think I'm biased towards finding a therapist.
Sure,
I think that's probably maybe the more efficient way, I guess. And then you can just Google therapist near me, and that'll point you there, even though there's a lot of wait lists and it's rough. That's hard. So in the meantime, if you're not comfortable with talking to a therapist, or because a lot of people have a lot of distrust, then I suggest finding something like Celebrate Recovery, where you can talk to other people that struggle with the same thing, or your pastor or a close friend. And if that doesn't feel comfortable, then there's tons of resources out there. There's books and workbooks that you can find, and there's so much information out there that you can just start educating yourself. YouTube, Therapy in a Nutshell on YouTube is like really, really entertaining and easy to understand. So things like that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of the Therapy in a Nutshell.
It's a good one.
I'll have to check that one out. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
Well, Shaina, thank you so much once again for being here and sharing some of those insights. Like I said, anytime you get to speak to a professional on something that is so actively involved in most people's lives, it's always so beneficial and helpful. So I appreciate you making time for me today.
Of course.
And anybody who's listening, thank you so much once again for joining us on the Journey podcast. If you haven't heard any of our previous episodes, we've got a few ones that we've done just recently that are all really awesome. And we hope that you join us next time as we continue to learn how to live a better story by hearing other people's stories.